Good morning, and you're very welcome to this, the 10th annual Cape Conference Centre for Aid and Public Expenditure. I'm Ed Hedger, and I direct the Centre for Aid and Public Expenditure, but also responsible for work on finance and economic development here at ODI. So this year, bricks and dollars, improving public investment in infrastructure. It's a really big, high priority topic for ODI and a big focus of our work programme. Well, we're delighted to have a distinguished panel, ministers, senior officials from international organisations, but a huge array of expertise, talent, insight within the room. And we really want to draw upon that over the next couple of days. We have officials from governments grappling with the challenges of infrastructure investment. We have experts from the international community and private investors looking at the investment perspective, and we have many people charged with actually trying to implement. We want to make this interactive. There are, I think, around 100 to 200 people online, or will be at different points over the next couple of days. We'll be on Twitter, hashtag Cape2015. The ODI Twitter handle is at ODIDev. So please do feel free to tweet. This is on the record, and we hope to have a big conversation going on outside. There's a lot of discussion, of course, internationally about this at the moment. Is this a challenge about the supply of capital? Is there a financing gap? Is this a question of ability to finance, deliver and implement at country level? We'll hear a little bit more about that agenda in a minute. But from the ODI perspective, we're also thinking about the big ambitions expressed through all of the summits that have taken place this year and still to come. The new Agenda 2030, the Addis Ababa Agenda for Action, and also looking ahead to the Conference of the Parties and the Climate Agenda for Sustainable Infrastructure. So a lot of themes that are happening there. Of course, we would like to claim credit for the fact that this has also become a very prominent and even more prominent issue in the UK at the moment. It's a happy coincidence that just as we're thinking about this huge agenda internationally, there is a lot of policy initiative taking place in the UK. And we hope that we can bring these two conversations together and look across the spectrum of income classifications, country groupings. I will look forward to also being part of this debate, be here for the next 2 days, but I want to hand over to Philip Krause, who leads our work on public finance here at ODI, to set out the framing for the conference and the questions and to set the challenge for the couple of days.
Thank you very much, Ed, and thank you very much, distinguished panelists and guests and visitors and friends of ODI. I will not even try to name check everyone who is in the room today and who is going to join us on the panel during the next 2 days, because then I would be standing here for much longer than I think I have been given license to. I am just going to make a brief pitch for what it is that we are trying to do here over the next 2 days. In a way, I don't really have to, because you already managed to show up, and so you were already sold on this pitch when you were reading the invitation materials. But let me just refresh maybe everyone's memories of what we think this is going to be all about. So Ed started his introduction by saying infrastructure is on the rise again. This is a big topic again now. My colleagues Mark Miller and Tom Hart and I, when we were doing the preparation work for this event, really they did most of the thinking on this. We found lots of examples of how infrastructure is now being considered a crucial development issue in many regions of the world. Not just developing regions, also in North America, in Europe and in the OECD. And if those figures are to be believed, then the challenge in terms of the size of infrastructure gaps is just enormous. If you were worried about the debt crisis in Europe over the last couple of years, all of that could be paid off many times over, and it would only make a very small dent in the overall global infrastructure financing needs, again, if those figures are to be believed. So there's a lot here that needs to be worked out, that is on the forefront of many policymakers' minds. Yet at the same time, this is not a new agenda at all. Those of you in the audience who have already been around during the 1960s and 1970s are probably going to feel a sense of déjà vu of how we now think that infrastructure is going to provide the fix for development. If only you build enough roads and bridges, then people would be able to bring goods to markets, and therefore economic growth is going to happen. And of course we know this because there's enough cross-country evidence to suggest that infrastructure is indeed in some cases a very powerful ingredient for development. And we also know of country examples. We have China and South Korea represented in the audience today, and we'll hear more about this later, of just how powerful infrastructure-led investment can be. At the same time, you don't have to look very far to also see how powerful a waste of money infrastructure-led development can be if it doesn't work properly. It can be a source of corruption, it can be a source of great inefficiency. And again, during the research that we were doing in the run-up to this event, one of the most entertaining things, in maybe a slightly inappropriate way, was that we were trading stories of just how awfully inefficient, especially mega project infrastructure development can be. And this is not just an issue, again, for developing countries. Our favorite example to this date, I think you saw an infographic about this outside in the hallway. If you haven't yet, then I would suggest you use the next coffee break to check it out, is the new Berlin airport, where during the year 2013 there was a period when this airport, which of course has not yet been finished, even though it was due to be finished in 2011, the light switch could not be found. And an enormous facility the size of, well, a large-scale airport was well lit 24 hours a day because nobody could figure out how to switch off the electricity. How do we go about making sure that this time is going to be different? That is really the challenge that we are facing now. And we are trying to avoid coming up with easy answers that we know are just not going to be sufficient to address the infrastructure challenge of today. We know that you can't just say, this is all about the money. If you put in more money into infrastructure, then things are somehow going to be built and all the problems are going to be solved. It's also not just about the politics. You can't just say, well, some countries are just corrupt and therefore they shouldn't be building these things, or they shouldn't be given money to build these things because they can't handle it properly. Because clearly a lot of countries that were poor and inefficient at some point were able to deliver infrastructure development on a large scale over certain periods of time. We also know that it's not just about the systems. If the only thing that was needed was to install the perfectly functioning investment management system, a well-designed procurement law, and then you could be done with it because all the projects would flow through these efficient institutions and instruments of public financial management, then, well, our job would be pretty much done and we could all go home. We also know that that's not the case. But then, if the answers are more complex, how can you be specific enough and yet concrete and purpose-driven enough to come up with answers that really make sense, that are not the next silver bullet that we know is not going to work out. And this is something that we are going to work through step by step. And specifically, we're going to start out after the opening session, where we are going to hear from both the finance side and the public work side, from two ministers who are going to talk about the experience of Liberia and Ethiopia. We're going to hear from international organizations, and we are then going to take us through during the rest of the day today to look at planning and allocation questions. So we're going to think about what is it that makes governments build certain things in certain places, how does that sometimes not work out, and how can it be done well so that these allocation choices are actually driven by the things that really make sense in certain sectors, so that crucial bottlenecks for growth and equity and other concerns are being addressed. Then in the afternoon, we're going to talk about implementation, which I think for many of us is sort of the black hole where all the good intentions disappear and turn into sad stories of things that have not been built and things that went over budget and that went over time. Then we are delighted that we're going to have Gordon Brown with us in the afternoon, who, of course, as both a former Chancellor of the Exchequer and a former Prime Minister, knows all about large-scale infrastructure development in a developed economy like the United Kingdom, which I think is going to be a wealth of lessons and useful experiences for everyone to draw upon. Tomorrow, then, we are going to dig even deeper into a couple of specific areas that we thought were particularly pertinent and particularly important to just understand better and understand a little bit more. So we are going to talk about urban infrastructure, because obviously every road, every airport, every transport system, every water and sanitation system is local somewhere, and it always involves the interaction between national governments, often state governments, and then municipal governments. And this is something that we, those of us who like to work with national ministries of finance and deal with large-scale infrastructure plans and national budgets that are at levels of aggregation where you never look into the detail, we like to forget these things. But really, urban infrastructure and urban development is going to be at the heart of this agenda in many countries going forward. We're then going to talk about the different possible roles that the private sector could play. Again, I don't have to say again, we're not really looking for the silver bullet here, that somehow the private sector is going to step up with higher levels of competence, access to more funding, and just generally a better drive to deliver results, and is somehow going to deliver all the things that the public sector is not going to be able to deliver. But really, how do you do these things? How do you organize and do PPPs in a way that doesn't put the taxpayer on hold for even more financing needs over the long run than you would have in the short run if the public sector had taken on these functions, and so on and so forth. And that leads us right into the final session, which is, of course, who is going to pay for it all? On the one hand, that is going to be a very crucial part of the equation, and since we are talking to so many public finance people in the room, I really don't have to make that point. But we also deliberately put this at the end of our conversation and not at the beginning, so that we put the horse before the cart, so to speak, and deal with these issues in what we think is the appropriate sequence. Last but not least, we hope that the most interesting session of them all is going to be our closing conversation, where we try to draw all of these things together and come up with something that everyone can take home and keep on thinking about on Monday, so that we're not just saying, last week we were in London, ODI has a very nice set of ground floor facilities, we had a good conversation, there are decent pubs around, and we had a good time, everyone together for 2 days. But we want to come up with specific things that need further work, specific things that we just haven't quite figured out yet, and specific things that maybe at a country level are worth specific and concrete action. I'm going to leave it at that for now, because I've been going on for far too long, and I'm going to hand it over to Alison, who is going to open the first panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Philip. And welcome, everyone. And it's a pleasure to have the opportunity to chair this opening panel. And it's also always a pleasure to come back to ODI. Whether one is thinking about how to operate in a globally competitive marketplace, or whether we're thinking about the potential significance of a road or a bridge being the difference between life and death, infrastructure matters, and it matters everywhere. And as Philip mentioned, and I think as Ed mentioned in the opening remarks, it's an absolute quintessential global challenge. And here in the UK, we're suffering from our own infrastructure gap at the moment, and it's worth sobering to think that as the fifth largest economy and probably one of the most globalised marketplaces in the World Economic Forum ranked the UK only 27th in terms of world ranking on infrastructure provision. Interesting gap there, which the current government is very keen to try and address. But actually, we're here also to hear, I think, from the real frontline experts and professionals in this area of how to do infrastructure well, how to do it sustainably, how to ensure it reaches those who need it most. And hopefully over the next 2 days we'll have a chance to really crack open that question. And we're very honoured today to have a very distinguished panel, but in particular to have two ministers with us on my right and left here, who I think will bring very special perspectives to the question of how to crack this infrastructure challenge. And I'm going to offer the floor first to the Right Honourable His Excellency Ato Ahmed Shide, the Ethiopian State Minister of Finance and Economic Development, who's going to go up to the podium and give us a sort of sense of how Ethiopia, which has actually gone through an amazing journey in relation to infrastructure, how have you achieved some of this and how much further do you feel you have to go? Over to you.
Thank you. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great honor and a privilege for me to be here today as a keynote speaker at the High-Level Center for Aid and Public Expenditure, CAPE Conference on Improving Public Investment in Infrastructure. I am certain that the conference brings researchers and senior policymakers from across the world together to debate on such critical and timely issues. First of all, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to Overseas Development Initiative in London for organizing today's event. They have created an excellent opportunity to sharing knowledge and experience of experts and professionals from different corners of the world on the significance of infrastructure in speeding up economic growth, explore means and the ways how countries, particularly developing countries, scale up financing for infrastructure and manage effectively the investment thereon, and identify what institutions and the processes that are needed to invest in infrastructure are. This conference is organized. Few months later, the international community gathered and adopted a historical agenda aimed at transforming our world. Unlike the MDGs, among the SDGs, 4 of the 17 goals directly focused on infrastructure development. In the 3rd International Conference on Financing for Development, UN member countries have launched a global infrastructure forum to consolidate new and existing infrastructure initiatives. They have agreed to fill the global infrastructure financing gap. I trust this conference will build on such agreements concluded to promote global infrastructure building initiatives. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, in my today's brief message for this gathering, I would like to focus on 3 relevant areas. First, I will brief you why infrastructure matters for Ethiopia. Second, I will focus on Ethiopia's government and its people commitment in undertaking aggressive investment in infrastructure and the challenges we faced over the last 2 decades. Third, I will reflect brief remark on our future intention in scaling up investment in infrastructure and what challenges lies ahead. As you all agree with me, infrastructure plays a irreversible role in economic growth and poverty reduction. Conversely, the lack of infrastructure affects productivity and raises production and transaction costs, which hinders growth by reducing the competitiveness of businesses and government effectiveness. Absence of important infrastructure impinges the ability of government to pursue economic and social development policies. There are no doubt that without improved infrastructure in all sectors, our socio-economic development efforts such as enhanced agricultural productivity, industrialization along light manufacturing, private sector development, and a number of related poverty alleviation programs could not be materialized without infrastructure. Providing efficient and effective transport systems was very demanding in attaining improved industrial and agricultural productivity and creating an enabling environment to unleash the potentials of the private sector. Effort in the provision of drinking water and constructing irrigation facilities both at urban and rural areas help to improve the living standards of citizens and realizing food self-sufficiency and food security in the country. Our endeavor in exploiting the huge renewable energy potential, which enable us to provide power at a competitive price, allows having competitive advantage in hosting investment in the manufacturing sector and other sectors as well. I can boldly express my opinion that overall infrastructure development has helped Ethiopia to reduce poverty by half, increase life expectancy by 19 years, improve the productivity of agricultural sector, and shift the image of Ethiopia from reference to drought and famine to one of the fastest growing economies and a positive prospect. Indeed, infrastructure requires heavy investment, and its benefit in the short term is not visible. Thus, we consider that public investment in infrastructure in Ethiopia is a must, as it creates enabling environment for private investment and the transformation of the economy. This leads me to my second point, which is highlighting our endeavor to build infrastructure in all aspects and the challenges we are encountering. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, recognizing the critical role of infrastructure in promoting the country's development program, we have aggressively invested in basic infrastructures. Of all the infrastructures, priority has been given and accorded to road construction development program, which is led by a consciously designed road sector development program, which is implemented in every 5-year phases, and there has been huge allocation of resources of public money towards this effect. Given that the road covers 90% of the country's passengers and freight transport, a series of road sector development program was initiated to guide and coordinate the road network development. Owing to such coordinated effort, the road lengths, including asphalt, gravel, and rural roads, tripled during the last decade. Thus, the average time taken to reach the nearest all-weather road was reduced from 3.7 hours in 2009 to 1.8 hours by 2013 and 14. Our road development program also includes building new roads operating as toll roads, which is now a new phase of our road sector development, and that will also take us forward in further bringing in the future in PPP arrangement in the future. We have embarked also on the construction of an efficient railway network for cargo and passengers. We are now just completing the Addis Ababa Djibouti standard gauge railway, and we have also a program to construct up to 4,744 kilometers of rail. And the Addis Ababa Djibouti railway now is due to be completed within few months. As you know, Ethiopia is a very populous country in Africa, second largest, and territorially is very wide, and we are landlocked. Therefore, investment on key railway infrastructure that connect us with the neighboring port to Djibouti is going to enhance the competitiveness and the productivity of the economy. And it's going to significantly reduce the logistic time and the cost associated with it. The Addis Ababa light railway has also been finalized and is already operational, and that's also improving the transport demand, public transport demand in Addis Ababa. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, as we all know, water is also a very important infrastructure. Also, water infrastructure is very important. We have also implemented national water resource policies and strategies so as to enhance and to promote all national effort toward efficient, equitable, and optimum utilization of available water resource of Ethiopia for significant socio-economic development on sustainable basis. Government interventions in this area include clean and safe drinking water, providing clean and safe drinking water both at urban and rural areas, enhancing irrigation facilities, and preserving the population environmental and individual sanitation. Energy sector is also another area where there has been massive investment by the government. A national energy sector strategy is also designed, and various energy project has been implemented, which has really boosted the capacity of our generation. And we are also significantly investing on the transmission line and distribution lines so that we can reach all the needy across the various parts of the country. We have two major projects now underway. The Grand Ethiopia Renaissance Dam, which is the largest hydroelectric power project, has a capacity of 6,000 megawatt generation. We expect within a few years we are going to complete this, is going to add to the energy capacity of the country. Currently, we have reached 2,400 in 2004, and only 10 years ago we had 791 megawatts. So there has been significant improvement in the amount of generation capacity. And in the coming 5 years, we expect to generate up to 70,000 megawatts from various renewable sources. Currently also, Gilgil-Gibe 3, which is going to produce 1,850 megawatt, is under completion now, and it's already started production. So energy is also an area where government of Ethiopia has really significantly invested. In recognizing the importance of information and the communication technology, we have also significantly invested on telecommunication network expansion, ICT network to accommodate emerging information technology needs. During the first 4 years of GTP1, which is Growth and Transformation Plan 1, there has been a lot of expansion in telecom services, which has really increased the number of subscribers of telephone, mobile telephony and fixed lines, as well as access to internet has really reached significant portion of the population of the country. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is my conviction that whenever discussion about infrastructure is undertaken, urban construction is mainly oversighted, as was previously mentioned. So urbanization is expanding, particularly in developing countries. It has to be a national agenda. It cannot be left to municipalities and local government alone. High urban growth rate, housing needs that either complete replacement or significant upgrading forced us to undertake aggressive investment also in urban housing infrastructure. Ethiopia has significantly invested also in this area. Particularly, we have introduced an integrated housing development program. The program is a large-scale approach to address the current housing deficit, particularly in the main city Addis Ababa and in other regional cities. And the building condominium house is part of this program, which urban dwellers also participate through saving mobilization. So it's also become a form of saving mobilization where citizens are encouraged to deposit a certain amount of resource in the banking system so that they can also benefit from this scheme. During GTP1, a total of 150,000 houses was planned to be constructed, but the actual performance was 157,000, even it is above the target. So it shows how significantly we are taking urban infrastructure agenda, particularly housing, is very important. It's linked to employment creation and also to reduce poverty significantly. For our success in providing affordable houses to citizens through an integrated housing development programs, the United Nations granted us its 2015 prestigious Public Service Award. This is in recognition to what has been done in terms of urban development areas. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, as I have attempted to explain, Ethiopia has given due emphasis in building its infrastructure as a top priority agenda. Notable achievements have been made. However, our success was not free of challenge. We have some challenges. Infrastructure development requires huge investment, technology, and expertise. That was a challenge. While infrastructure are critical input to all socio-economic activities, it has been a challenge to meet both the pent-up and current demand in the provision of infrastructure such as power, water, road, and ICT. Even though we achieved significantly, when you see the land spatial space of the country and the population, which is more than 90 million, still the demand to further invest on infrastructure is very, very huge, very huge. So a lot of task is ahead of us. Due to the international price hike of construction materials, cost of infrastructure building has been progressively increasing. And some of mega projects related to this, their completion period is also elongated. So there are capacity issues also which has to be addressed. And there has been a lot of investment in building the capacity of local contractors, but still we need to do more in terms of building own local capacity, in terms of input production and engineering capabilities also. So that's also the major challenges. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, although we have achieved significant progress over the last decade, we are still one of the least developing countries with huge infrastructure gap. Our future is more demanding and requires us to scale up our effort at all infrastructure building efforts fronts, as it would be very difficult to succeed in our endeavor without effective collaboration, and given that building infrastructure is capital intensive, we are very keen to enhance our partnership with our development partners while we rigorously embark on domestic resource mobilization in terms of saving mobilization and enhancing the revenue capacity of the government through fiscal system, so that we can have also enough room and the spending power. And effective spending is also very important. I think it's not only generating revenue. Effective spending plans is important. That's why we prioritize capital spending mainly, and infrastructure is the major bulk of where the government spending is going. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, our vision is to become a carbon neutral middle income country manufacturing hub by 2025. Ethiopia's first growth and transformation plan has ended in August 2015. We have designed its successor GTP2, which provides a roadmap and direction for development over the next 5 years. During the next 5 years of GTP, which we call Growth and Transformation Plan, it is a medium term, which is a 5-year plan program, expansion of quality infrastructure, development such as road, railway, dry port, airport, energy, telecommunication, water and irrigation schemes, which are critical in attracting investment, creating market opportunities, and enhancing competitiveness, and to boost regional economic integration, will have a special consideration. Because we are landlocked, most of our infrastructure also has a dimension of regional integration. That's why we are investing a highway project which connects us to Kenya. We are already invested a lot of roads with Sudan, with South Sudan, and we have highway and railway and telecommunication connection with Djibouti, which we see as a model when it comes to integration of infrastructure integration between our two economies. Therefore, Ethiopia is also taking responsibility of integrating the region through energy export and through infrastructure connectivity. And we have achieved a lot of result on this ground. Indeed, we acknowledge that infrastructure building requires huge investment, technical know-how, effective and efficient policy, and institutional framework and collective actions. Although we have already built important policy framework and institutional setup, we envisage that securing financial and technical resources and the low technical and the machinery capacity of local contractors could be a formidable challenge in our future. That's why now we have established a Ministry of Construction, where construction sector capacity in general, engineering capacity in general, in construction sector has been taken as a very important priority. And that ministry is going to be tasked on coordinating all these major infrastructure projects, particularly building the capacity to do it ourselves, to have the technology and engineering capability. And that capacity building program is now going to be consolidated responsibly by a new ministry, which is called Ministry of Construction. However, I have trust together that in partnership with our development partners, we will realize our shared objective in scaling up infrastructure investment for sustainable growth and alleviating poverty. I would like to mention that World Bank, African Development Bank, DFID, EU has been very instrumental in supporting government of Ethiopia's infrastructure development, social development, and capacity building schemes in various areas. So we will continue to mobilize domestic resource and to continue on effective spending on infrastructure and addressing the issue of challenges of project preparation, monitoring, and ensuring value for money. Those areas, we have been investing a lot on those areas. So our public financial management system in Ethiopia has been improving. That's why we can say we have achieved significant investment on infrastructure. It was possible because of the institutional strengths we were able to build and because of the capacity we were able to achieve. But still, we need to invest in further strengthening of those institutions and also on capacity building. Finally, I would like to reiterate in my message that strengthening global partnership through critical discussion forums such as the current one is highly constructive to promote public investment in infrastructure to realize the post-2015 SDG agendas. Thank you for your attention. I thank you all.
So we've heard from a minister in a finance ministry about the challenges of overseeing the implementation of national infrastructure plans, and I don't think anyone in the room could say that those plans lack ambition. There's a very impressive agenda there. We now have the opportunity to hear from a minister responsible for actually spending the money on infrastructure. I'm delighted to welcome His Excellency Jude Moore, Minister of Public Works in Liberia. Jude Moore is extremely well placed to talk about how to get infrastructure built, and in a context which has had perhaps its disproportionate share of challenges of late, which is, of course, the context of Liberia. Before becoming Minister of Public Works, he also previously headed the President's Delivery Unit. So you can see this from a number of angles. Jude, the floor is yours.
Thank you.
Yes.
This here for the... Oh, okay, great, thanks. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for having me here. Usually it's very pleasant to come to London because I'm a Chelsea fan, and this time it's not the easiest thing coming to London. But we'll do better. I'm confident that we'll do better. We're still looking at a top 4 finish. It's great being here, and I think the juxtaposition between Ethiopia and Liberia is pretty instructive for what we're trying to do here, because on the one hand, like, as he was going on about measuring available electricity in thousands of megawatts, I was like, how can I follow this guy? Because in Liberia, we have a total installed capacity of 22 megawatts. And so, in my view, when a country like Liberia, a country like South Sudan, when we talk about infrastructure, it is, and compared to the West, or say the UK, it's not a difference in degree, it's a difference in kind. And I have some pictures here today that will show, to try to make the point that I'm trying to make today. One of the things I try to achieve here today is to be able to add this dimension to this conversation about infrastructure investment. I think most times when we talk to our partners, the international development institutions, and institutions such as this one, ODI, that the conversation tends to, each side tends to focus slightly more on a different part of the conversation. And what we want is to be able to create a forum in which what we're saying, we're not talking past each other, but we're actually talking to each other in terms of what we see as important, what they see, our partners see as important, what we see as important. And so for the way I structure my comments here today is to talk a little bit about what is important to our partners and our own views on those things, and then talk about what is important to us and then how we go forward. I know one of the things that our partners are concerned about, especially with this new infrastructure push, is the issue of white elephants. And we're concerned about this too, that you have these massive infrastructure projects that do not really deliver. There's no value for money on those. But on the issues of white elephants, we have two views. The first one is that the white elephants from the 60s and the 70s in Africa were not simply the result of abysmal decision-making, investment decision-making on the side of African governments. We're all complicit in those, because in the West, I mean, the world was split into good guys, bad guys. The bad guys were the guys other people supported. The good guys were the guys we supported. So it didn't matter. It didn't matter what your good guy did. No matter how much he beat his people, stole the money, brought it back to Switzerland, you kept giving him money because he was a good guy and you were on his side. And so in the end, we ended up with these massive failures of infrastructure projects. So the quality of investment decisions from the 60s and the 70s and the quality of investment decisions now are different. And I think we need to make a distinction between those. The second thing is white elephants. When I first came to Liberia, I came back from school, in graduate school in 2009 as an aide in the president's office. And in that rainy season, in an economically depressed part of the country, is in the southeast of the country, they were paying up to 300%. Saw a 300% increase in the price of gasoline because the whole part of the country was cut off because of the roads. And this is a part of the country that's already really, really poor. And it came to me then that there's nothing greater in terms of driving the unyielding poverty in my country than the absence of infrastructure. But this was supposedly intuitive. Then we began to engage with the Millennium Challenge Corporation to invest in Liberia. And one of the things that the MCC does is it commissions a growth diagnostic, a constraints analysis. If we're going to reduce poverty, we have to grow the economy. So we need to find out what is the binding constraint to economic growth in the country. So the MCC did this amazing thing, and it comes up with two things: the absence of roads, serviceable roads, the absence of reliable and affordable electricity. So then when you find the constraints to growth, you present a project to the MCC, and then the MCC gives you a big grant, anywhere from 300 million to 700 million to remove that constraint. So we presented the MCC two roads. These roads, if we invest in these, and the MCC goes and it does is an investment. It behaves like an investment firm, and it does an internal rate of return, and it says to us, well, you know, these roads, they don't meet that internal rate of return, so we can't invest in roads. But roads are a constraint, and this is my point. The MCC didn't want to invest in a white elephant. Now, what the MCC sees as a white elephant, we see differently. How do I get the slides? Just press this thing?
Just press the top arrow.
All right, I'm pressing the top arrow right now.
That's the side arrow.
Side arrow? All right. I thought I should show a couple. There's actually one picture that I wanted to show. I'll come back to these. But huge portions of the country, between 4 to 6 months a year, look like this. Now, we need to be clear what you're looking at here. In Liberia, we divide our roads based on functions. We have primary roads, which would be like in the US is the interstate system, or in Germany, the Autobahn. And the primary roads connect county capitals. Our subdivisions are counties instead of provinces, county capitals, or lead to international borders. Ladies and gentlemen, what you're looking at are primary roads. This would be, if we were in the United States, this would be one of your interstates. And so that's why following Ahmed is sort of difficult. We have 10,000 kilometers of roads in our country. And of those, maybe 700 of them are paved. That includes pavement in urban settings. This is what I mean when I say the infrastructure need of a country like Liberia is a difference in kind. For a country to be able to diversify, for an economy to be able to grow, there has to be a sort of baseline of infrastructure, existing infrastructure of which to be able to make that growth and make that. Now, our partners are besides white elephants, so we strongly disagree in terms of what is considered a white elephant. It may not make the internal rate of return, but public investment is simply not for economic returns. It's also for social welfare benefits of the people who are in those places. One of the things I want to stress here is that Ebola outbreak occurred in the middle of the rainy season. Patients died on their way to treatment centers because of roads like this one. Specimens on their way to the labs became invalid because of how long it took to get them to the lab. And so while we may not be able to make the economic case for a particular road that might be considered a white elephant, we can make the social welfare case for such a road. So that's one of the things. The second thing is, of course, absorptive capacity. One of the problems is that if we give you all of this money, can you actually process all of this money? And I think that's a very fair point, that our systems are so weak. If you put this amount of money into the system, there will be leakages, and we may not end up seeing the value of the money that. But then on this, I say in Liberia, we have a slightly different take on this also. One of the things that have come out of our interaction with our international partners has been the establishment of implementation units. We have an infrastructure implementation unit at the Ministry of Public Works. We have a public financial management unit at the Ministry of Finance. We have a program management unit at the Ministry of Agriculture. And we have a project implementation unit at the Liberia Electricity Corporation. But what happens is that you have a small unit. It's like an island of efficiency and effectiveness within a sea of not so great efficiency and effectiveness, right? But what it does is that it increases the amount of efficiency we're able to get. So a small unit at the Ministry of Public Works, the IIU, is able to oversee over $300 million worth of infrastructure projects. Money that, if it had come through the entire system as it is, would have probably leaked out. Now, there may not be enough data points in terms of implementation units in Liberia to be able to do a whole study. But you can do a case study on Liberia to be able to see what gains and efficiencies do we get by having these implementation units. So now what makes it even better for us is that the infrastructure implementation unit, the PIU, don't actually handle the money themselves. All of the money is handled by the public financial management unit that sits in the Ministry of Finance. The point I'm trying to make is that while we have these massive infrastructure needs, there's one more picture I want you to see. It's pretty awesome. This is it. This, ladies and gentlemen, is not a pit. It's not a mining pit. This is a primary road. and the guy in the middle there, he has to go out to see how deep it is, to see if he ask the pickup truck driver to come in. So we're not going to wait until our systems are 100% functioning for us to be able to attract the kind of financing we need for us to be able to provide the infrastructure here. By having these little units, these infrastructure implementation units, we will be able to provide it. The final thing I wanted to talk about is and is linked to our ability to absorb is how much money is actually available for infrastructure. The World Bank itself shows, I was looking at their website, pretty impressive, that deficient infrastructure, the effect of deficient infrastructure is greater than bureaucratic red tape, corruption, having weak enforcement of contract system, all of the other bugbears of development that we're talking about, deficient infrastructure. So I would think if that's the case, most of the money available for development, since we want to develop, will be toward infrastructure, but that's not how it works. Another thing I would like us to focus on also is the inefficiencies introduced by our development partners. I have a development partner who's going to help me help me, assist me, finance a 56-kilometer road from conception to feasibility and design, initial concept design, detailed design, to retention when the project is finished. It's almost 60 months. If it takes me 60 months to do 56 kilometers of road in a network of 10,000, God, when am I going to be able to? And so a part of it is not simply all of these unnecessary procedures and rules that take as an assumption that we're so corrupt, we're going to steal all of the money, so we have to go through this. Introduce new onerous burdens on a system that already doesn't have enough to be able to do it. So on our side, yes, we need to strengthen our system so that we be able to absorb this and be able to do it. But on your side, not you, I mean. But on their side, there are lots of changes too that would need to happen for us to be able to do this, because we've done an assessment of what it would cost to pave. Don't worry about our secondary roads. Don't worry about our feeder roads. Just the primary roads to connect every county capital is $2.2 billion. It means that for the next 20 years, at the very least, Liberia needs about $100 million in road infrastructure. The deficit for Africa as a whole is around between $93 to $100 billion a year over the next 10 years. And we always talk as if this is a lot of money. This is too much money. Where is it going to come? I pointed out to my colleagues last night that in 35 days, the Chinese stock exchange lost $3.2 trillion in 35 days, and Africa needs $1 trillion in a decade. Perspective, people. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm going to go a little segue now, but bear with me for a moment. That was terrific. Thank you, and brought us, I think, down to earth very, very quickly. When the newly elected Canadian Prime Minister was asked why it was so important to him that he had a gender-equal cabinet, his response was, because it's 2015. Why should we be shocked by images like that you put up there? Because it's 2015, and that is a primary road in Liberia. And we should all collectively be shocked by that. We haven't been at this business for 5 years, 10 years. We've been at it for decades. And that is a primary road in Liberia. People are dying as a result of roads like that. There is no prospect of being a competitive economy with roads like that. So what are some of the key ingredients to getting this public investment machinery moving to support quality infrastructure for everyone? And no one better, as I pass over, this was my segue, to begin to address that question for us. I'm not laying it all with you. It's Richard Hughes, Division Chief at the IMF Fiscal Affairs Department. Richard is many things, but he is lead author of the recent IMF publication on making public investment more efficient, which was, I think, was launched at the Financing for Development Conference in Addis. Yes. Is that right? So I hope you were there. You saw some of that. And you are, it says here, you're the architect of the Public Investment Management Assessment, otherwise known in the business as PIMA. So I suppose you're going to help us now perhaps understand a little bit about what are some of the kind of key ingredients that support the kinds of efficient public investment that Jude Moore was talking about, but also our minister from Ethiopia was alluding to about the need to crack issues around contracting and allocation, implementation, and delivery. Over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you this morning. But both ministers are very hard acts to follow, and I fear that my pictures are going to be nowhere near as persuasive as Minister Moore's, but I will nonetheless try and use them to persuade you of a few points. And points that are about not only the quantity of public investment, but also the quality of public investment, because both matter for the impact that they have on social outcomes and also economic outcomes. And I think the sort of subtitle of my presentation and of the paper, which we wrote at the IMF back in May, could be public investment, the good news and the bad news, because there are reasons for hope about the future, but there are also reasons for concern, many of which have been illustrated by the comments of the two previous speakers. But to start with some good news, which is that after a quarter century of decline, public investment levels have begun to recover in emerging markets and low-income countries, and are now back to levels last seen in the mid-1980s. So the quantum of investment now happening in the developing world is at almost unprecedented levels, and getting back to the peaks that we saw back in the period where investment was booming. The bad news is that if the past is any guide to the future, about 30% of the potential of that investment is going to be lost due to inefficiencies in the way in which those investments are managed. And for low-income countries, this efficiency gap, as we call it, is even bigger, at around 40 to 50%. And to explain how we arrive at those sorts of numbers in the work that we did, if you look at the x-axis of the graph on the left here, that shows you the cumulative public investment per capita in US dollars. The y-axis is an index of infrastructure coverage and quality, so that's the bang that you're getting for your investment buck. The green line that you can see there is an efficiency frontier defined by the countries that get the maximum bang for their buck at a given level of investment. And the dots are 134 countries. And as you can see, most of them are well inside that efficiency frontier, which means that most of them are getting less bang than they should for the investment buck that they're spending. As I said, on average, they're losing about a third of the potential value of that investment in terms of infrastructure impact. And you can see also from the right-hand side, which shows you the averages and the spreads on that infrastructure gap, which is the vertical distance between those dots and the green frontier, that gap is around 40% for low-income countries, 30% for emerging markets, and about 15% for advanced economies. So that is a measure of how much is being lost and how much potential is being lost when countries put money into public investment. So that's some bad news. Some good news is that we have a reasonably good idea about what to do about closing this efficiency gap. I think as Philip mentioned at the beginning, people have been thinking for quite a long time about how to improve the efficiency of public investment, and countries have been working on this issue for quite a long time. So unlike in some other areas of public policy, we have a reasonable idea of what good public investment management looks like. And in the paper that we published back in May, we identified, based on surveys of the literature, case studies of best practice, 15 institutions that determine the effectiveness of public investment decision-making at 3 key stages of the process: planning sustainable levels of investment across the public sector, allocating that investment to the right sectors and projects, and then implementing those projects on time and on budget. And as Philip said at the beginning, of course it's not all about institutions, but if we can strengthen these institutions, we estimate that you can close up to around 2/3 of that efficiency gap between how much countries spend on investment and how much they should be getting from investment. So it's not all about institutions, but a lot of it is about improving institutions and improving management practices in individual countries. Now a bit more bad news, which is that the public investment chain is only as strong as its weakest link. That is that all 15 of those institutions are much more effective when they're working together than any one is individually. And in all countries, but in low-income countries in particular, you have some areas of strength, but you also have a lot of weak links in that public investment chain. And the spider chart that you can see here on this chart shows you the relative strength of each of those 15 institutions for a sample of 25 advanced emerging market and low-income countries. And the further you are toward the outside of that spider diagram, the stronger your institutions in each dimension. And what you can see from that is that there are areas of important strength in low-income countries. National and sectoral planning is especially strong. Medium-term budget frameworks have been an area where countries have been improving their capacity for a number of years and are particularly important to the planning and budgeting of public investment, and are again an area of strength in low-income countries. And increasingly, countries have comprehensive and unified budgets so that they take capital and recurrent expenditure decisions together as part of the same integrated budget process. But there are also some important weak links. The management of public-private partnerships, which are spreading across low-income and emerging market countries and becoming an increasingly popular way of financing of investment. the appraisal of projects, the funding and management of projects, and the monitoring and maintenance of assets all remain areas of important weakness in low-income countries and need to be strengthened if you're going to ensure that this new wave of investment they get a bigger bang from this new wave of investment than they got from the last one in the mid-1980s. But let me conclude with some good news, which is that if we can find ways of strengthening these weak links in the public investment chain, the potential growth payoff is huge. In our paper, we found that the most efficient public investors get around twice the economic return from their investment than the least efficient economic investors, meaning they get twice the growth bang for their buck by having stronger public investment management institutions than those countries which have weak links in the public investment decision-making chain. So a big challenge, but if we tackle it, and we tackle it successfully, a very big return in terms of both economic growth as well as social development and ultimately human welfare. So with that, I'll hand back to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. So I'm going to, lots to think about there, but I'm going to pause for a moment and pass on now to Robert Hunja, who is currently with the World Bank. He's Director of Openness and Integrity in the World Bank's Global Governance Practice, which of course gives him a particular perspective perhaps on this issue, but also he has really relevant recent experience in helping to establish the Public Procurement Oversight Authority in Kenya and was its first Director General, which again I think gives you a very unique position perhaps on some of these issues of doing public investment well in the area of infrastructure. So, Robert, what do you think, from your experience and from your work within the bank, really matters for investing well in infrastructure?
So thank you very much. First of all, as a child of Africa, I'm very proud of my two ministers. Not only are they very articulate, they are about my age. So I feel very, very proud to be here and to share with you just a couple of ideas. There's a lot that could be said, so I'll just focus on kind of three very, I say from where I sit, as a person who's led kind of major procurement reforms in my own country, Kenya, but also now oversee the procurement function at the World Bank, my own perspective about three things that I think we need to worry about and I think we need to think about. And I'll not I apologize because I'm not going to make big policy pronouncements. I'm going to be kind of fairly instrumental because I think it's really on the ground where things happen. And fortunately for me, I had not, in fact, negotiated with Richard what I'm going to say, but the areas which they have identified as areas which need some work correlate to what I see and what I'm going to share with you about in the next couple of minutes. So one, how do we mitigate the risks is really the question that I'm raising. And one, let me talk about procurement, not only because I'm a procurement professional, but because procurement really matters. And I don't mean procurement, the process of selection of the contractor, but I think innovation around procurement. And I think as we go forward, and as we put all these big sums of money on the table to implement complex projects, the procurement strategies that we put in place and the contract strategies that we think about will really make a difference. So what I want to urge is two things on the procurement side. One is let's think really of non-traditional methods of contracting. There are people now who are experimenting, for example, with what they call design-build methods of contracting, where you bring in the private sector to help you think the best solution and the best approach to solving the problem you have, whether it's primary roads, whether it's water, power. So we should be thinking of really new and innovative ways of doing contracting that ensures that we bring the best minds, the best approaches, but also we think about kind of some of the economic impacts of contracting, including how do we grow local contracting capacity. So I think this is a whole package around procurement that's really, really important. And I think we need some real creativity so that we move away from the traditional ways of doing things. Second on procurement is openness. I keep saying, and some of my friends sometimes disagree, where is Neil Cole? I keep saying, for example, Neil, that the ideological battle for transparency of budgets has been won. Now, whether it's done, how it's done, in what is a question. But I think the ideological battle for openness on budgets has been won. It's not the same with contracts, and it's not the same with contracting processes. So push for radical openness. So those two things on procurement. Number two, I think we've heard from the ministers, we need to invest really massively on technical capacity for supervision and contract management. I think what we've heard from Minister Moore about isolated implementing units that are small and managing small amounts of money, kind of islands of integrity in places where we have deep, massive capacity issues. So I think the next agenda is to invest massively and nationally on the capacity to be able to supervise and manage contracts, especially as we get into more complicated contracting methods such as PPPs. And I think this is a huge area where we all need to focus quite significantly. And secondly, again, focusing on the openness side, is being very public and very transparent about what the expectations are for what is being delivered on the infrastructure side. Third, as I conclude, is innovating around asset management. And we probably don't talk enough about this, especially those of us from the funding side, where we usually think just putting money on the table is enough. Actually, infrastructure will pay off if we manage these assets properly. I think we need to think very creatively about how we innovate around this. There are people, again, who are experimenting with new ways, including kind of why not outsource management of assets? Why not outsource how roads are maintained through some performance-based criteria that is made public so that citizens can monitor what's going on? And I think this is really important if we're going to get the big bang for the buck. So let me conclude again, say innovation across the entire cycle from procurement to asset management, radical openness so that all the public and the people who own these assets know exactly what is supposed to be delivered. They can help in supervision. They can help in ensuring that things happen. And third, involving other stakeholders beyond those in government to ensure that citizens are able to monitor what's going on and are able to ensure that what is supposed to be delivered is delivered. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. I think we're sort of circling around the fact that increasingly this, what we're identifying here is a number of quite wicked collective action problems, I suspect, in delivering efficient and effective infrastructure. And maybe we can come back to those in some of the questions. Now I'm going to take a slightly different perspective from Phyllis Papadavid, who's a research fellow here at ODI. I mean, we've been very much talking about the specifics of infrastructure, the infrastructure gap and public investment. But of course, this has a resonance in the macroeconomic space in particular. And of course, some of the history of big investment in infrastructure has also been big problems for macroeconomic stability, in particular on the debt sustainability side. And so what Phyllis is going to make some comment about is what are some of these macroeconomic challenges today in 2015 as we try to broach this infrastructure challenge.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much, Alison. It's a great pleasure to be on this panel this morning. I think when we're thinking about lessons learned from infrastructural investment, managing macroeconomic uncertainty is absolutely crucial for longer-term investment spending. When we translate investment into infrastructure, often what we see, more often than not, is that we get disruptions from macroeconomic shocks. So at the moment, developing countries are actually facing a triple shock right now, from higher US interest rates and a higher US dollar, a slowing Chinese economy, and weaker commodity prices, which is going to hit resource exporters. So we're facing a triple shock at the moment when we're thinking about lower income economies. When we're thinking about these shocks, what's key to know is that it is occurring at the moment, and we know that these shocks matter, particularly because they impact investment spending. So if we take US interest rates and focus on the debt sustainability issue, higher US rates and a stronger US dollar can make for an unsustainable debt dynamics in developing countries. And this, in turn, can damage prospects for access for finance, external finance. So that's one key element to focus on, the unsustainability of debt dynamics and the impact on access to finance. If we take lower commodity prices, which impacts resource-rich economies, commodity exporters will get hit. Nigeria now has a current account deficit after many decades. So this is very important. If we take an example like Mongolia, its external debt stock has risen from 100% in 2009 to 376% of its exports. So this is a very extreme example of what can happen when you get into unsustainable debt dynamics. And unfortunately, what we're seeing right now is that some sub-Saharan African economies are also seeing an increase in external debt stocks as well. So I think it's key to focus on that macroeconomic risk emerging. And fundamentally, these macroeconomic imbalances don't make for a solid foundation when it comes to long-term infrastructural finance. So what can we take from this? My view is that, yes, we need sustainability in infrastructural finance. We need infrastructural finance to be sustainable. But we also need infrastructural finance to be managed in a way that is actually much more resilient to macroeconomic shocks. So stabilization funds and sovereign wealth funds are useful, but they can only be meaningful if they successfully accumulate and safeguard wealth. So if we go back to the example of Mongolia, it has a human development fund for its resource revenues, but its expenditures have consistently outstripped the revenues coming in, particularly before parliamentary elections. In comparison, in Norway, the Norges Bank investment fund manages the petroleum revenues, but critically, they invest those revenues abroad to diversify against the shocks and against asset prices in their own economy. So it's a more of a broader picture of what can be done to safeguard this financial aspect. And in wrapping up, I would say, if we are looking to sort of better infrastructural investment, I think it's very important to safeguard infrastructural finance, if you like. Thank you very much. I'll hand back over.
Thank you. Fantastic. Right. Okay. So terrific, I think, presentations, thoughts from everyone. And really the purpose of this session is to sort of get our conversation going. So I hope in a moment you'll be putting your thoughts together so that you can contribute to that conversation. But I just want to start off, if I may, by just coming back to Minister Shide and Minister Moore. And just to I'm sure in both of your country contexts, there are infrastructure projects that you feel, have gone particularly well, possibly textbook-like, and along the lines that Richard set out in some ways, but others that really haven't gone well. And I'm just wondering if you could reflect for a moment on what are some of the key differences when it goes well and perhaps when it doesn't go well. And then maybe we can build on that in the discussion. Minister Shide, would you like to give us a few thoughts? What is the key ingredients from your perspective of what goes well?
I think the most important issue is infrastructure is part of the entire development process. It's not something which is an island. Therefore, a comprehensive development framework that guides the development process is very, very important. The policies, the strategies, the commitment of the leadership to eradicate poverty and sustain and generate growth is very important. So infrastructure is meant to develop the economy, to generate growth. Therefore, it's not only what's happening on infrastructure alone, it's also what's happening on human development and human skill formation. It's also what's happening on institution building. It is the wealth generation by the private sector which has to flourish. So it is about unleashing the potential of the economy to produce more. That is the perspective. I think the most important factor for investment on infrastructure to go well is the quality of institutions matters. The capacity and quality of the institutions that manage, regulate spending is very, very important. So the planning is very important. There has to be proper planning. There has to be proper sector development. For example, rural sector development program in Ethiopia is one of the most excellent development program, which World Bank and other development partners also has been supporting. It has a comprehensive program which is monitored annually. So in terms of resource envelope, also we allocate resource for that. So there is a monitoring and evaluation of that project area. So infrastructure project has to fit within a sectoral development program within the wider development process of the country. That is the most important thing. The quality of spending is very important, from procurement, all those stages. Capacity is very, very important, all those issues. So I think capacity and institutions are relevant to make spending very well. So public financial management system, procurement system, as my colleague has said, in Ethiopia we have invested on those reforms. And fairly we can say we have relatively stronger institutional arrangement when it comes to these types of public institutions. They are well coordinating on the planning, spending is well coordinating, the budget is pro-developmental, major allocation goes to investment programs, which is a massive program in Ethiopia, and it's very visible. It is in every sector. So I think the engineering capability of monitoring and all those are important. Sometimes there are delays on the project, which increases prices, which brings variations. That also is a result of capacity limitations on procurement management processes, particularly on project level procurement management processes. And the capacity of local contractors are also very important. Sometimes when the contractors' capacity are limited, the efficiency within which the project will be delivered on time, the quality, the price will be compromised. But overall in Ethiopia, I can say we have been consistently improving on ensuring value for money on our public investment.
Fantastic, thank you. Mr. Moore?
Sure. I think my colleagues from both the IMF and the World Bank captured this. One of the first things is the quality of the contractor, so in procurement. And so in Liberia, the contracts that have worked really well were those where we're getting external financing, and those that haven't performed as well were those that were financing directly out of the government budget. And the reason was, part of it was, so I've been Minister of Public Works for 10 months, and I inherited a lot of projects that were awarded by single source. And so because it didn't go through a competitive process, it's not always the best contractor who gets it. That's the first thing. In terms of the externally financed projects, they all go through a competitive process. But then we hire a monitoring consultant on all of them. So for example, I was talking to my colleagues last night. One of the biggest projects we have is financed through the World Bank and is divided into 2 lots. Both lots are won by Chinese companies, but the one lot is supervised by a company from New Zealand, and the other one is supervised by IMC from the UK. So by hiring external monitoring consultant on these, we'll be able to get the best quality from that. So what we're doing now, we're beginning to apply that on projects that are financed by the government itself. All our projects have to be competitively tendered. All our projects, the financial and technical opening, everybody's there, so we know what each contractor offered. And then we have 5 Liberian monitoring consultants. They're not as technically capable as, say, an Opus from New Zealand, but they're good enough for what we're doing. So we're now having every project we finance, we also have external monitoring on it, and that allows us to be able to.
Interesting. Many thanks indeed. That's very interesting points. Okay, this is now your opportunity. And also for those of you who are online, if you do have questions that you'd like to raise, please do contact us online. I've got the iPad here, and you could also tell us obviously where you're from and who you'd like your question addressed to, or whether it's general to the panel. Okay, I'm going to open it up now. I'm going to sweep across the room. So I'm going to start this end. I will make it that way, and take a few at a time. So if you could just sort of collect comments and points.